Armand Hammer's grandson recently played a Russian spy on Man from Uncle. Do you feel this was a tacit?
I think it's a great grandson. I think.
Is
I
it?
don't remember.
Still rich.
But Armie Hammer, right?
Yeah.
It was very good. It was great. Wasn't that funny? Yeah. I maybe this was a finally acknowledgement. I was right all along. I haven't seen it, but it's perfect casting. Yeah, sir.
You talked about when you went to the CIA expecting the Glock and
Yeah.
all the other things.
Yeah.
When you started writing fiction, was there anything you needed to do to let go of the real part of the world so you could write interesting, suspenseful, thrilling fiction? Because it wouldn't be someone sitting in a cubicle translating journals.
No, exactly. We don't want to read about that. No, what I did was to construct in a sort of an alternative world that resembled that world in certain ways. It was close enough, my own sort of stage set in which things happen in a more exciting way. In which, yes, there is a Glock involved, and someone's having the worst day of their life, and that book happens to be there to capture that. So that's sort of, I would sort of create a different reality. And the more I got hamstrung by reality, the less exciting the book.
Yeah.
Okay? Yes.
How do you decide things are going well with an editor versus time to maybe to find another?
How do you know things are going well with an editor?
Right.
You mean,
This is always-
which one are you talking about?
Well, from the authors, there's always a good give and take, right? They're always going to come back with suggestions, but at some point you say, you know, this is good stuff that's working, they're digging their feet in, I really don't like it, or, you know, this
It's
just
an
not working at all.
interesting, you reach an interesting standoff. I almost always give in. I'll admit that. I sort of feel, especially if what the editor is saying corresponds to my instinct. Or if he's saying it and I'm sort of thinking, yeah, I can see that point. Generally, I sort of feel that an editor is like just an informed reader. And I tend to say, okay, that's fine. But generally, it has come to this in certain situations where basically I have said, I think it's really okay the way it is. And the editor says, okay, we'll just agree to disagree. And ultimately, it's got to be your book. Ultimately, the author wins and is responsible if that was a mistake. That make sense?
Yeah.
You had,
Regarding getting your books made into movies before they were accepted, what was the process? Your agents sent them, or someone contacted?
yeah, well, this was interesting. I had a manuscript for a book that was called The 0 Hour, and it went to Doubleday, and it was rejected there. But the editorial assistant, who actually had read it, loved it, and she was a scout for Hollywood. She would get paid money to sort of give them manuscripts. And so she literally faxed this entire manuscript to LA. And all of a sudden, there was all this interest. So basically, it's because the manuscript got stolen. And which is fine with me, right? But generally what happens is your agent will have a co-agent, a Hollywood agent, whose job is to read this and try to sell it. And sometimes they sell it before the book is published, or before you have a book deal even. That happens. That's the basic process. Yeah,
You were saying halfway through you came up with this.
because I worked out this afternoon right before I came over here. I'm starting to schwitz, so. All right, go ahead, I'm
You were
sorry.
saying about halfway through you came up with this alternative, this new ending.
Yeah.
Did you have a different ending in mind, or
I
did you
did.
go forward not knowing the ending?
I generally don't like to start until I know how it's going to end. And this was a departure. This was a very different ending from what I had in mind. But when I looked back on what I'd written, I realized since this new ending could work, that was a logical place to go. So I changed my mind. I will do that. I basically believe in letting your instinct lead you, in going where, if you have a better idea, going in that direction.
So you know the beginning and the ending usually, are you an intense outliner in between, or do you go by the seat of your pants?
Have you guys heard different explanations for this, or different arguments for outlining
Yeah.
versus not outlining?
Yeah.
The thing is, we all make up our own rules. So, I mean, you're gonna do whatever works best for you. I was on a panel with Lee Child, and Lee basically believes in no outlines. And I was arguing in favor of doing an outline. And he said, why don't you try it without an outline? We'll see what happens. So the next book I tried without an outline. And what happened was I spent like 2 months writing a whole sequence that was a blind alley, that did not really belong in the final book. So I wasted time. The book came out fine, but I could have had it done 3 months earlier. So basically what I do is I do what in Hollywood is called a beat sheet. I will basically have the major bumps charted out. I have tried to outline the way Jeff Deaver will outline. Robert Ludlum actually told me this. He said he'll do an outline of 200 single-space type pages.
He was here and he showed sort of.
Did he?
A little bit.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And I tried that with one of my books, and that was the end. I couldn't write it. I had done this outline. I was like, all right, I'm done. What am I going to do now? So I do an intermediate thing. I basically do the basic beats, and I let myself veer from it if I have a better idea. So basically, I do a combination of outlining and non-outlining, and that's what works for me. That's what I've learned.
And the beats, how often, like, are they every third of the book, or are they?
No, they're more often than that. It's basically, I try to do every significant scene. What happens in the scene. But I'll change it all the time as I'm going through it, and I have a faster and more exciting way of getting to this point.
Do you actually write that in prose, like the dog killed the man, the bear ate the woman, like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will write in prose, Rick goes out on a date.
Yeah.
Rick does, so the scene will be 10 pages long, but the outline description is about, a sentence.
So each scene has its corresponding sentence outline.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like a Hollywood, what do you call it, storyboard or whatever.
No, I know people who do that too.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting idea, to put index cards up on a bulletin board and all that. Someday I'll try that. It sounds interesting. It just seems like a lot of work. Maybe I'm too lazy to do that,
I think the outline seems like a lot of work. Then you have to change, you're saying you change it. when you
Sure.
change it, yeah.
Yeah. While I'm writing it, some morning I'll just say, forget it, forget the outline, I have a better idea here. And it usually makes a good scene. So, Lee Child is partly right here. There is something to be said for spontaneity, for sort of letting your imagination take over. But in the days in which my imagination is not taking over, I have this parachute, or this, I have the security blanket of having a basic beat there that I can work with. Yeah.
I'm just curious, when you edit your first draft, does that second draft get longer or always shorter? Or does it?
Almost always short. Yeah, it's just the way I tend to work a little too long, and I will go through this and I will just figure out ways of tightening up a scene, so that a scene will go from 10 pages to 5 or 6. It's always an improvement if it's shorter, in my books anyway.
So, yes, last question, and then we're gonna.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
When you let your imagination go as opposed to your outline, do you ever have characters that appear that you hadn't thought of before?
Not really, but I have characters appear who are not what I figured they would be. Let me give you an example. So I'm writing a scene right now where someone's been killed and the Washington DC police show up. And I had in mind a sort of grizzled homicide cop who's sort of seen it all, kind of sardonic and all that. I sat down to write and I just said, I'm gonna make him a newbie cop. And I'm gonna make him kind of an organic nuts and berries kind of guy. And sort of a, you know, what do you call him? He has kind of like a, you know, goatee, and he's kind of hip. He's a hipster. And the character came to me that way. And it turned out,
Eat cop.
what's that? Yeah. Truly a big cop. And it turned out to be a much more interesting scene. So that's sort of like having a character occur to you, a new character.
Yeah.
You know. And it was great. Whenever that happens, I'm grateful for my imagination to have taken over.
So, before we, I just want to say there are books here, and if you haven't read a Joe Finder book, this is your opportunity to read a really terrific book. You can see how terrific Joe Finder